Coogs house. The Houston Cougar basketball season's feeling more and more magical by the hour. The goal is to get to San Antonio and cut down some nets in the Final Four, and it feels like we might know more about that path right now.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs Daily Podcast, all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation, but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below if you consider ranch a dressing or a dip. I think there's a right answer to this one, but I just can't tell sometimes. Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. More on that fun later in the show. Talk about driving to different distances, I guess, to get to these games, actually, potentially in a Nissan. But I want to talk some about Jay Lucas and how that could impact Houston later in the show, because I do think that that's something people are overlooking in the big picture here. I want to talk about how Houston should handle the Baylor game Saturday, Big 12 tournament, and getting ready for the big dance. But I think that's the biggest story of the day, is the big dance is around the corner. And with games coming and going, it feels like Houston's getting more and more secure in where they're going to end up. Now, when the committee puts out seeds and things like that, like the first one seed will get to kind of pick where they go. The second one seed will get to pick where they go from what's left, and so on and so forth. And it appears that Houston is getting more and more locked into this idea of being the third number one seed, ultimately getting to pick their location. The closest they would theoretically get to go there would be through the Midwest Regional. The South Regional goes through Atlanta. The East Regional goes through Newark. The West Regional goes through San Francisco, and the Midwest will go through Indianapolis. And for what it's worth, the Houston Cougar program should have some familiarity with that location. Obviously, that's where the Final Four was played in 2021. Some, I guess, good memories of getting there. The game wasn't quite what you wanted, right? But you feel like there are some good memories in getting there. And I've kind of, to this point, not really cared a whole lot about one seed versus two seed because of where they've got Houston lumped here. This third one seed, fourth one seed, first two seed, second two seed, like foursome in the middle here kind of feels like, wherever you are, you're going to have to play one of those other ones in the Elite Eight game if everything worked out like chalk, right? And so I don't know that it is super valuable to be a one seed versus a two seed or what have you. I will say that getting in, at least that, given that being the situation here, right? I do think getting to Indianapolis is a lot better for Houston than getting to San Francisco or Newark. I know there's a great like Bay Area alumni group and all that kind of stuff that would love to have it in their backyard in San Fran. But as far as filling up a stadium goes, I think you're just more likely to get people to Indianapolis. It's couple hours in the plane. It's not a crazy distance to drive as far as these things go. Honestly, you could talk about how easy it is to get to Atlanta as far as the South, but I don't think there's any chance you get that one with the two teams ahead of you in the standings being both Auburn and Duke. I'd imagine they want that, right? And I imagine the second place, I think, will be Duke. I think they're going to want to play on the East Coast and go up to Newark. That's just my hunch here, and it's why people are consistently, because of that, being a very clear favorite for those two. A lot of people are putting Houston in the Midwest region. Now, your two seed in that region, like I said, will probably be one of the SEC trio that's hovering in the same part of the standings with Houston, Alabama, Tennessee, and Florida. You've seen Alabama before. You weren't quite this version of yourself yet. If you're Houston, Houston's a lot better program and team right now than they were back in November. That game happened, remember, before Houston's football season was over. I mean, that was a long time ago. The game went to overtime, chaos, right? the other thing I'll say is that as far as those three teams go, feel like uh, Tennessee is probably the most like mirror image of Houston, for better or worse. The guy Ziegler guy's really good, very physical team. Barnes and Sampson, coach very similar kind of mindsets. Big culture guys. Obviously, I'm going to favor Sampson a little bit in that one, and I think he actually got the better of. I don't have the every statistic postseason, regular season, every from even before the Big 12 days when Sampson's at Oklahoma and Barnes is at Texas. But I think Sampson's kind of had Barnes' number in the past. They haven't seen each other as much lately, obviously, with being the programs that they're in and so on. But I do think that that's a fun matchup because it's just going to be a great basketball game. Obviously, I'm going to give Houston the edge. We get to that when we get there eventually. And then the other option here for your 2 seed, your potential Elite Eight matchup is Florida. Florida's odd because I feel like they've got the highest ceiling and lowest floor of those three teams in a NCAA tournament style of way to decide a champion. That lowest floor thing could really hurt them. You might not even have to see them in the Elite Eight, but it also means that you're going to play potentially the highest ceiling out of those three teams if you saw them in the Elite Eight. So, whatever the case may be, we're going to break it all down when we get down to that point. But that's what's increasingly looking like is Houston will be the third number one overall seed. That means that they will get to play in the Midwest region, it looks like. Again, goes through Indianapolis. And a lot of people are talking about that 2 seed because that's theoretically your toughest competition in bracket. And for what it's worth, as the third number one seed, you're going to have one of those 4 teams. There's a pretty big drop off from that 6th team to that 7th team. And so Duke and Auburn as 1-2 would probably have a little bit easier path. I do think what's interesting in looking at like bracket mock-ups and stuff like that is they try to get you where you're not playing someone you've already played in that potential first matchup. You can't control it much after that. I do think that you'll see other Big 12 teams play in other regions, though. You see some in the South. You'll see some also in the West because the national conference it is. And you might even see, like, if West Virginia sneaks in, they may be in the East, right? What you're kind of seeing, though, because of where they sit in the bubble and so on, is people are slotting, like, UConn and Gonzaga and Creighton and these programs that, like, pretty strong basketball programs, even though they're having maybe down years, kind of in that Houston area, the 8-9 seed, right? And that's because of how the thing snakes back and forth, right? But it's interesting. And we remember Houston and A&M last year. That was a second round 1 versus, I think, 9 matchup. And that's really, really daunting to think that, like, you're going to play a potentially great coach like Coach Few and Gonzaga and get ready for something like that in the second round. Now, I've already, texted and gone back with Locked On Zags guy, Andy Patton, some on that one because that'd be a fun, he and our buddies, that'd be a fun thing to go through there. But I do think on the whole, I'd almost rather play the smaller school that's having a good year than the legacy program having a down year, because that program has great athletes, great coaching. They can turn it, like, you only got to play them once. Anyone can win a game, right? Like those kinds of things. Whereas a team that, anyway, that's kind of where especially after the way last year's game went, it was an incredible performance, but really, really taxing on the guys, really. And so I don't know who I'd prefer there, but that's kind of interesting to me to see. And I don't know that I want to see UConn going for their three-peat as my 8 seed necessarily, or something like that. Now, whatever the case may be, I think a lot of people are assuming that foursome of games, the 116 and 8-9, and the theoretical, if it were chalk, 1 versus 8, looks like that's going to happen for Houston in Wichita. Not just because it's familiar from the AAC days, but also I think it's kind of the, as far as picking locations goes, going to be one of the closer ones as well for those first couple rounds. Again, it's a familiar trip for Houston fans, not crazy difficult to get to. It's also like, if you've been going back and forth, you want to go to like the Big 12, like Kansas City for that kind of stuff or whatever, it's all right there. And I do think you'll see some people show out for that one. But that's kind of where it's looking like things are going for the Houston Cougars in the future and the dance. I want to talk some about strategies for between now and then. It's going to be one of those moments where Sampson and I think, disagree, and he's the potential Hall of Famer, but I still feel like I need to make my case. But before we get to that, we're talking about going all these games, and one of the greatest ways to get to a game would be a road trip. Road trips are great. Great car for road trip is a Nissan Armada. The Nissan Armada Team of the Week, brought to you by our friends over at Nissan and that new 2025 Armada. Each week, Locked On College Basketball experts across the network are picking one team that stands apart, from top-seeded stars to unexpected upsets. These guys showcase their strength, sheer power, and need to push the team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut team of the week are the Houston Cougars. I promise I only got one vote on that one, but since joining the Big 12 last season, the Cougs have a combined 33-4 record in conference games, win the regular season by multiple games in both years. There is no team in college basketball that more capably embodies the rugged Armada than Kelvin Sampson's squad. Houston's tenacious defense leads the nation in fewest points allowed per game for the second straight season. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's what the Houston Cougars have been doing as of late. So just like the clear team of the week is ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, you can conquer it with the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs. You're talking about Houston getting ready for March, getting ready for the madness. And honestly, this idea of how they're going to get ready from here is probably one of those few things that I disagree with Kelvin Sampson on, if I'm reading between tea leaves here. And honestly, again, he's the future Hall of Famer, so maybe that makes me crazy here. But the conversation when you've won the regular season by multiple games for the second year in a row in the Big 12 is, do you even need to finish up the season and play your guys? We mentioned in the opening, like this cluster between the third number 1 seed and the second number 2 seed, those 4 teams feel fairly interchangeable as far as what line they're on. Obviously, I think Houston's the best of the 4, and I think they're very deserving of the third 1 seed. But ultimately, you're going to have to play those other teams anyway. So if you were to drop a couple games resting and drop to the second 2 seed, are you really much worse for wear, right? That being said, you also play a Baylor team this Saturday in Waco. I actually just got approved the other day to get to that one. I'm excited about that one. Rare that I can get to one of these games living where I live and also when my coaching season ends. But Baylor's going to come out firing at home in Waco, their final home game. They're like just recently played themselves on the right side of the bubble and are kind of, fighting to stay there. A lot of reason for them to be going, obviously fighting crazy hard. I mean, not that Scott Drew would have to do anything else, but they have a lot to play for still. They've got Norchad Omier, who hurt Houston before when he was at Miami, and is playing really well individually this year. Jeremy Roach hurt Houston at Duke before. They still got VJ Edgecombe and stuff like that across there at Baylor, and it's definitely a thing that those guys all have a lot to play for on paper. Houston's kind of got at least the next week kind of they understand what they're doing, right? They got the double bye in Big 12 tournament, and they are probably no lower than that second 2 seed right now. They just didn't play again the rest of the season until the NCAA tournament. And the question is, do you rest guys, right? Do you give yourself a break here? And honestly, I tend to think I would rest guys in the sense that I might not suit some out. Everyone who plays is playing to win. And I don't think that Sampson and I would agree on that part of this, right? That you cannot coach a game with rest in mind. If you're going to rest a guy, just don't suit him up, right? But ultimately, I don't think I'd suit up like Emmanuel Sharp's play with some ankle pain stuff this year. I don't know that I'd play him in this one, right? Terrance Arceneaux coming off the Achilles. I dabble with the idea of do I play Cordell and Mercy a lot more, right? Or whatever. Milos is so important. You're right. Like, you put him in a jumpsuit just because. I don't know. I don't. I think I would do that because of what my goals are and yada 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 and so on. Right. The difference that we've heard Sampson talk about is that the culture with the way Sampson's got it going, right, is so much about competing in every aspect that honestly, he argues that taking a guy out of competition, right, is kind of counter to what they do. That's just not who they are. And, last year, with the exception of starting Ryan Elvin on senior day, Houston had the same starting lineup from the very start of Big 12 play until the end of the season. And that was a season that they won the Big 12 by multiple games as well, right? They looked gassed in that Iowa State championship game in the Big 12 Conference Championship, and it didn't matter. They went with the same starting lineup. 2022-23, they had 3 games in the entire season that they did not have the traditional starting lineup in that year. That year, Jarris was sick one game, so he started Francis and Roberts both in the front court. Senior day, they started Darius Bowser and Reggie Chaney, rest in peace, in the front court as both seniors for senior day. And then Marcus Sasser got hurt in the American Athletic Conference semifinal, so he sat the final game, but ultimately was back on the floor for the first round of the NCAA tournament, that ugly game against Northern Kentucky. He played the NCAA tournament hurt, and they didn't rest him in the 64-round game. They or taking ready for the 32 or anything like that, right? And so you kind of across the board here, and I guess I can actually go back. I think probably the one that probably speaks this more so actually might be 21-22. After conference play started, there are only 2 games Houston went with the entire season after the conference play started where you had different lineups. One of them, again, being senior day. That's after like crazy big-time injuries right before conference play started, like Marcus Sasser, Tremont Mark gets hurt, right? Like, so you're still finding out a lot about who you are, and they still got a starting lineup first game of conference play and didn't really change much from there on out. And you saw a little bit more flexibility in 2020 and 21. Schedule was also a little bit different, kind of COVID year with weirdness or whatever, right? But all that is to say that Sampson sticks to his word, and the culture he's built is he only has dudes that will fight tooth and nail to be on the floor, even when they're banged up. Last year, in this same situation, when they're up by multiple games in the conference, they played Juwan Roberts with the banged up knee and scoping and the tape on the hand and all the things, right? That's just who the Cougs are. And so I'd imagine that while it might not be what I would do, Kelvin Sampson's a Hall of Fame coach. What he's going to do is he's going to take his team to Baylor over the weekend and line up with a starting lineup like you've always seen every week thus far this season, save for when he started the guys for senior night on Monday. I'd imagine you see them play normal minutes and rotations. The only thing you could see is earlier this year you did sit Emmanuel for a week when his ankle injury was kind of bugging him. If that ankle's never really gotten better, you might see him sit. But you're going to see starting lineups and starting minutes like normal from these guys for the end of Big 12 regular season play, for Big 12 tournament play, and so on. And again, he wins a lot of games, gets to a lot of Sweet 16s, gets to Elite 8s, has been to the Final Four with this university. I can't question it because the way he's built the program works. I don't know that, again, I'm getting you ready for it because I know that a lot of people online are saying rest, be healthy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just don't know if that's what's going to happen or not. Now, that being said, every season's different, every roster's different. And frankly, we've heard Sampson talk about health this year for his guys, how important it is to be healthy when you get there. So maybe I'm wrong right now. We'll see. We'll be following it along each and every day at Locked On Cougs. Speaking of one more thing I'm going to be following along with as well, a big coaching change in college basketball happened on, I guess, officially Wednesday evening, which is a weird time for it to happen, but it's also the kind of change that we have to hit on here because it's going to hit Houston pretty hard. Locked on Cougs, hosted by Parker Ainsworth here, breaking down all things Houston Cougars. And this topic I don't think is clearly as directly tied to Houston, but we get there very quickly. And that is that Jay Lucas just got hired officially by the University of Miami as their next head basketball coach. I guess ultimately replacing Laren Yeager, who'd been there for, an all-time great kind of guy. Not necessarily for what he did in Miami, just I guess they did get to a Final Four, but like for more than just that, right? And Jay comes from Duke, where he was the associate head coach. He's also worked at as an assistant at Kentucky and Texas. He played at Texas, I want to say. Brother John Lucas runs the JL3 organization, the big-time Nike EYBL circuit team based in Houston, but really recruits a lot of Texas for their squads, right? And again, one of the best programs in America. And I, from a talent acquisition perspective, think this is a move for Houston and Houston Cougar fans to keep an eye on. As far as Houston and Texas guys are concerned, Jay Lucas has been the lead recruiter on Shelton Henderson, the 5-star player out of Houston's Bel Air High School that has Bel Air in the state championship game in 6A D1, right? He got Shelton Henderson to commit to Duke. He was at Kentucky and got Cason Wallace from the DFW area at Richardson High School to commit to Kentucky out of high school. He got Severe Wheeler to commit to Kentucky out of the transfer portal. Severe Wheeler was a Houston area kid that led the SEC in assists at Kentucky and then at Georgia, and then got to Kentucky and did the same thing. Yes, he led the SEC in assists at two different programs. Jay Lucas got the Houston area kid from one to the other, right? Damian Collins was an Atlanta, Texas kid who ended up at Kentucky to play for Jay Lucas as the assistant there. Before ultimately, when Jay went to Duke, that kid ended up going to LSU, transferring afterwards or whatever, right? Damon Collins from Atlanta, Texas. He didn't play with JL3 in the summertime, but a big-time Texas area recruit. When Jay was at University of Texas, I think it makes sense. He had a lot of Texas guys, but he got like a lot. He got Greg Brown, top end, whatever, out of the city of Austin. He got Jace Febres from Westfield, Royce Ham from Nimitz, Jacob Young, who went to Yates, and that's Jacob Young, son of Michael Young from Phi Slamma Jamma. Jay Lucas got him to go to UT Austin. Probably the highest ranked kid he got to UT Austin from the state of Texas was Andrew Jones, who was from DFW's Irving, I want to say MacArthur High School. He was a top 25 kid in America, gets to Texas, gets diagnosed with leukemia. That's the reason I remember this story a lot. And Jay and he were very close. Gets diagnosed with leukemia, would ultimately come back and play, right? Crazy story. But that's like just Texas area kids that he's recruited and he's landed those kids at whatever program he was at. As far as bigger picture, he got Cooper Flagg to Duke. He was a lead recruiter on Cooper to Duke. Cam Boozer, he's Carlos Boozer's kids. He got Cam out of the two of them to commit to Duke. Shaden Sharp to Kentucky. The guy lands talent. He identifies well and he lands talent, and he's got real connections to Texas as a state, real connections to Houston as a city, and his brother runs one of the best AAU programs in the area. I think this is something Houston Cougar fans, as we continue to say, like, we want to seal off Houston and like keep Houston in Houston and all that. I know that's more of a football thing, but generally speaking, like Arceneaux, Tugler, Ramon, top end guys in the Houston area. You've also got like LJ, who ends up coming back to Houston from the Houston area, not unlike that Wheeler kid that ended up at Kentucky, playing for Jay, right? You've got not Emmanuel Sharp. You got Jawan Roberts went to Clean, right? Like, you're recruiting Texas really, really well, even if you've gotten a little bit national. Here's the one caveat I will say, is while like Houston got Kingston out of San Antonio, and for my money, I know they didn't win the semifinal game the other night. I think Kingston's as impressive a prospect as anyone in the state of Texas, right? I mean, he's just tremendous. I know Shelton Henderson won that game, and Baylor is going to the state championship game, but like Kingston can go, right? Yes, he's from Texas. He's coming to Houston. Really, you're starting to see Houston become a national basketball recruiting kind of school, right? They're hitting the academies. You got, Isaiah Harwell's coming from Wasatch. Chris Sinak is actually from Louisiana, so it feels like Houston's backyard as well. But he's at Link Academy. A lot of the 2026s you're seeing come through and visit are academy type kids. Felici and stuff like that, right, are also academy type kids. Houston's getting in. I mean, Jarris Walker, right, was an IMG kid. You're getting Houston into that game more and more, and so the saving grace I could see here is that as Jay gets to Miami, which does have a lot of NIL money, right? And just as a school, they have a lot of people throw real money around in South Florida, right? As that's happening, right, he's going to be looking at kids in Houston and kids where he has connections and kids worth whatever. And truthfully, Houston's like, yeah, we're looking at the best kids at Peach Jam, wherever they're from. We're looking for the best kids at the 3SSB Adidas circuit, wherever they're from, right? We're looking at the best kids in the Puma, the best kids in the Arm & Armor, the best kids wherever, just because they're the best kids there, wherever they're from, right? Sampson's talked about wanting to get the private jet to go on recruit trips, and I think this is a good argument for him to get one, because if you're going to see other people that pilfer the city of Houston for high-end recruits get those guys to places like Miami, I think the one-up you can do is like, hey, but Sampson's getting guys from wherever to come to Houston. Right. And it does feel like Houston's getting to that point. I mean, Emmanuel's from Florida himself. We mentioned Jarris. The program's kind of taking in present tense that step, to becoming that kind of national prominent recruiting program. But I will say that as far as keeping Houston area kids and getting the best kid out of Houston, it's feeling kind of like this Lucas thing may be something to keep an eye on. I've been impressed as an assistant high school basketball coach during the day at the kind of guys he finds and the kind of guys he convinces to leave the state of Texas and go play far away. I mean, I understand Duke and Kentucky are Duke and Kentucky, but like this is at the same time when anyway, he's getting them to go play at those schools as opposed to playing at Houston. I know Miami doesn't have the same kind of like lore around it, but he's going to have that kind of money around it with Miami dollars. And so I just think that this recruiting battle, you can see some things interestingly shake out. I've been texting back and forth with a couple of my recruit guys about 2026s as well. But I kind of dropped a line like, what do you think about this Jay thing? And they think that it's like going to be really good for Miami. The one who I talked to the most frequently, though, did say that he feels like Houston will be fine because they're Houston, right? And so maybe I'm a little worried about this for nothing, but I do think it's something to keep an eye on. And maybe it's just because I think that highly of Jay as a recruiter. I know he's been a good coach. A lot of guys are good coaches and not good recruiters, though, and Jay's both. And so we'll see how this goes down for them. All that being said, whatever recruits 2026, 2027, 2025, maybe even commit to Houston, look at Houston, talk about Houston. We talk about each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. We're also going to get ready for Baylor this weekend. We're going to get some stuff with Cam Stewart over at Locked On Baylor out for you guys as well as my own preview will probably be out Friday. Gigantic Locked On Big 12 squad coming out later today as well. So make sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live, ready to go with that. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. And let me tell you one thing, the Locked On Podcast Network is working on some big things for March Madness. So find me on social media at Panzer512, and I'll be posting about that as soon as we can. Again, Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go Cougs.